Hi guys, welcome back to a page in the chapter, or welcome if you are new here. My name is Paige and it has been a hot minute. Don't ask me what happened over the month of December. I do not know. I just failed immensely at being a functioning human. It was just a very, very busy period, and unfortunately any kind of content creation just went out the window, took a massive backseat. But I'm back, I'm motivated, I'm feeling rested, and to be honest, my term 2 schedule does lend itself a bit more towards content creation, so I'm really hoping that everything goes to plan and things become a little bit more regular here on this channel. I knew that it was not going to be smooth sailing doing this alongside my master's degree. I do think that things are looking up. So even though I am very late to the party on the end of the year booktube videos, I'm still gonna do them anyway. So even though it is midway through January of 2023, let's go through my top books of 2022. If you guys like seeing booktube content, I post a lot of vlogs, I post a lot of standard typical booktube style content, then do please feel free to hit that big red subscribe button down below to stay tuned for future content. If you are interested as well, if you could also check me out on Instagram and Twitter at Page in Chapter, that would be great, because I am more likely to be sharing updates on Instagram and Twitter, and I am nearly at 1k on Instagram, so if you go hit that follow button, that would be incredible. So without further ado, let's get into my top books of 2022. So I read 64 books last year. I believe it was between the 60 and 70 book mark. I had set my goal at 50 books, which was a decrease in books from the previous 2 years where I was aiming at over 100. I just wanted a slightly more chilled out year, and I will be getting more into the vibes for 2023 when I upload my 2023 goals video, which will be coming soon. But I did read over 60 books. I did complete my Goodreads goal. Whilst there were numerous 5 stars, and I do want to do an every book I rated 5 stars video, so whilst there were numerous 5 stars, I only have 8 here that I truly believe are favourites. And so these books are in absolutely no particular order, and I'm just gonna go through them now. So the first book that I gave 5 stars was actually my first book of 2022, and that was These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. I went through a mini Chloe Gong obsession, and despite that I have still not read Foul Lady Fortune, which is her most recent book. I own it, I just have not read it yet. But this book is a Romeo and Juliet retelling about rival gangs in Shanghai in the 1920s, but there is also a monster going around feeding on people that Juliet and Roma have to kind of team up and put their differences aside in order to defeat this monster that is threatening both of their gangs. And so it is a fantasy romance, but make it historical, that is enemies to lovers and also second chance romance. It's really good, and I love Chloe Gong's ability to bring in so much history and just spiciness to the world building. I really like that in a book. Like, whilst I love when authors come up with their own worlds and things, you can never go wrong with that, I do really enjoy when there is some influence of history or politics or international relations, and this book really had that, and I think it had it in a really easy to follow way, and I loved this book. I then devoured the second book in this duology and adored that. And Foul Lady Fortune is a spin-off to this series following one of the characters in this duology called Rosalind, and so I'm excited to at some point this year hopefully get into the next installment, kind of the spin-off series. But I did just love this book. It really motivated me to want to write, which is so rare and does not happen often. And I ended up fleshing out an entire story basically. I have got nowhere with writing it. I think I'm only at like 8,000 words into the story, but I have the idea there, and it is thanks to this book. And so the next book I'm going to talk about is the only other fantasy type story that is in this video. I really hit a stride with romance this year or last year and became a romance reader. So this is the only other fantasy-esque book that is in this Best Books of 2022 video, and that is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune, and I think this might actually be the best book. So maybe I should have saved it for the end, but it made sense to do these two together. So this was my first experience reading a TJ Klune book, and it did not disappoint. This follows our main character Wallace, and we meet him in the opening chapter of the book when he is attending his own funeral, and it is a very empty funeral. He was not loved in life, he did not live a very fulfilling life, and it follows him being taken to the place between life and death, which is this little tea shop, and ghosts can visit the tea shop before they cross over, but also humans can visit the tea shop as well. And it is about Wallace interacting with the other residents of this little tea shop and the owner of the tea shop, and realizing that actually there was more to life and he really missed out. And it follows him trying to really make up for lost time and becoming a better person, and it has a really cute dog, and this is just one of those absolutely heartwarming, bittersweet stories that had me sobbing. I love stories like this, even though they do make me cry, and it's not necessarily a good thing to cry. I just do love a story that is so cute that it brings tears to my eyes. It's like the same kind of feeling as A Man Called Uwe by Frederick Backman, which is also about an old man who realizes the meaning of life and being nice to people. I just love those types of stories. They're really like heartwarming, wow, they're like, we are really overcomplicating life type of stories. And yeah, this was my favorite book of 2022, and if you have not read it yet, in my opinion, this is better than House in the Cerulean Sea, but I do just have a bit of a fascination with death, so maybe that is why. So on to the romances in this list, which is where I really kind of found my motivation for reading again, and one of my favourite romance books of all time and of the last year was The X-Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. I've also read Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon, which was really good too, but this one just takes the cake because it is so clever. So The X-Talk follows our main characters Shay and Dominic, and they work for a failing radio station, and in order to try and boost their ratings, they decide to, or they are pushed by their bosses to host a show called The X-Talk, where two exes are giving people relationship advice. Now the problem is Shay and Dominic are not exes, so this is a real twist on the fake dating trope, where it's like a fake breakup trope instead, and I really enjoyed that twist and the creative elements it brought to the story. And fake dating is my favourite romance trope out there. It can do no wrong in my eyes, and so this little twist on it just made it so unique, because the problem with the fake dating trope is when you've read 5 of them, you've probably read all of them, because there's not many ways you can make it different. But this really did the job for me, and I loved it. Next we have Collided by Lauren Asher. I read a lot of Lauren Asher last year. Really, she's a good favourite author of mine, and this is a Formula One romance series, and I am a big Formula One fan. I actually did have a video of Formula One fan reads the Dirty Air series for the first time, which is how I read this book, but guess who lost their SD card and everything on it, and no longer has that video. But this is book 2 in the Dirty Air series, and this was my favourite of the lot by far. It follows Sophie and Liam, and it is friends to lovers, but it is a friends to lovers that really works for me. I felt like the chemistry between these two was far beyond any chemistry that we saw in the other books, and whilst I did love Noah and Maya as well, I do just think there was a certain je ne sais quoi about this book that was slightly better than book 1. Whilst it is friends to lovers, that doesn't really work for me, and whilst it is like bucket list that doesn't really work for me, the two combined in this Formula One setting did really work for me. And I also loved everything that Liam, our male main character, kind of had to go through in terms of character development and the difficult situations he was in by being in this world of Formula One, and I really enjoyed it, loved it, and this is my favourite of the series. You do not need to read the series in order, but I do think it is helpful to read book 1 before reading book 2, just because the stories kind of take place at on a similar timeline. By the midway point in this book, Noah and Maya's story is finished, but the first halves of the book are kind of intertwined, and you'd think that would be annoying to read, but I do think Lauren Asher handles it very well. And as an author, she always puts playlists at the beginning of her book, which is just my favourite thing in the whole world. And you know what's even better? She puts so much Taylor Swift in here, and love that for her. We then have Act Your Age, Eve Brown, which is book 3 in the Brown Sisters series. You would think fake dating and academic fake dating being like my favourite tropes, that Take a Hint Dani Brown would have been my favourite, but it wasn't. There was just something about this one that I loved. I loved Eve's character development. I loved the slight exploration of autism in this book, and I absolutely adored Jacob. He was just the cutest, most cinnamon bun, wonderful character, and I loved it. And I loved the fact that it was a kind of Gilmore Girls-y setting, and yeah, just it is called Act Your Age, Eve Brown, and it very much follows Eve having to grow up a bit, and I just really related to her. I really enjoyed seeing everything play out here. And I think some of the family element that have been like the downsides to having a close family that have been touched upon in the previous books were dealt with a little bit more in this book from the youngest sister's perspective, and I really enjoyed seeing that, because even though they are a close family, it was nice to see there be some issues a little bit. So really enjoyed this one. I don't have much to say about it, to be honest with you. It's just a good time, and I'm really happy to have finally found a Brown Sisters book that I feel passionately about. Like the past 2 were very meh for me, or like as much as I enjoyed Take a Hint Dani Brown, it didn't blow me away. It didn't, considering it is a fake dating and I love that trope, I just didn't feel for it the way that I normally feel about fake dating. There was just something about it that I didn't like. And then Get a Life Chloe Brown is bucket list, which I really don't vibe with, and I also really didn't like how late the conflict between her and Red came about, because then I just didn't believe in their relationship when it was wrapping up. But this book, however, this book is my favourite, and I'm happy to be on the Brown Sisters trilogy hype, because I wasn't before. The fact that this book is on this list gave me a little bit of a crisis. Not because it doesn't deserve to be a best book, but because in my head I was convinced that I read this book in 2021, but both my Bookstagram and my Goodreads are telling me I read this in 2022, so I'm confused. And that is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I did kind of hint at this one when I talked about the last book, because I talked about how academic fake dating is like my favourite thing in the world. Where do you think I got that from? I adore this book. I did only give it 4 stars and not 5 stars, but that is only because sometimes I really do have a problem with the way Ali Hazelwood presents women in STEM and the world of academia in general, but that is definitely me bringing my own insecurities to the table, because I would like to be a woman in academia. I'm definitely bringing my own insecurities to the table with this one, and whilst I do know that sexism for women working in STEM is a really serious issue that needs to be dealt with, I'm not entirely sure that the audience Ali Hazelwood is marketed to are the ones that should be kind of receiving the commentary, you know? It was less pronounced in this book than it is in Love on the Brain, which I only gave 2 stars, and I loved the fake dating and the relationship between Adam and Olive so much. Like, I was squealing, I was freaking out, I could not physically put down the book, I just had to keep reading. And so that really outweighed some of the negatives of the presentation of PhD candidates and being a woman in STEM. Like, I was just kind of able to only dock 1 star for that, but just looking at the romance in isolation, this would be like a 5-star book, and it's one of my favourites. I literally plan on rereading this today because I miss it so much, and one of my friends just read it for the first time and I'm really jealous, so I'm gonna reread it. So yeah, I would love to know your guys' thoughts on the women in STEM sexism representation in Ali Hazelwood's books, because I really don't know if this is just me, but I feel like it's almost discouraging, and particularly after Love on the Brain, I had a little bit of a crisis about whether academia was something that I wanted to pursue. So I just feel like maybe Ali Hazelwood should maybe consider at least a little bit how this might be interpreted by the women reading her books, because it's not as empowering as she thinks it is. We have a slightly sadder book now, and I do have a whole reading vlog on this book if you would like to go and check that out, but that is Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. Now, I was pushed to read this book because I saw a video that said Magnolia Parks is just Red Taylor's version in a book, and naturally, as a very big Swiftie, I had to check it out. And I bought it, and they were correct. This is very much Red Taylor's version in a book, and so naturally it's a 5-star read, and it's one of my favourite books of the year because Red Taylor's version is one of my favourite albums of all time. So, you know, need I say more? This follows our main characters Magnolia and BJ, and they have been in a very on-again, off-again relationship throughout their entire teenagehood and into their young adult phase, and we follow Magnolia and BJ at a point in their relationship where they are just friends and they've had a very messy breakup in the past. But even though they're just friends, there is still so much yearning for each other, and you can really feel their yearning on the page, and the fact that these two characters should be together, but there are constantly things tearing them apart. And whilst this is a series, so I could continue with the series to actually see what happens, I love the way this book exists on its own in my mind, and there's not many books in a series that can do that for me, where the way it ends just makes me feel like I'm okay with that being their ending, and I love that from this book. It's also, did I mention, very, very Gossip Girl vibes. It follows very rich people living on like the Upper East Side dealing with their rich people problems, but in a sad Red Taylor's version kind of way. So I love that. It is an incredibly, incredibly character-driven book where not much outside of what's happening to these characters and how our characters feel is really pushing the story along. So if you do not like books like that, I don't recommend this, because this is the most character-driven, nothing happens type of book in the world, but it somehow really works, and I gave it 5 stars. I love it. This is great to read whilst also listening to Red Taylor's version, or like an acoustic Red Taylor's version playlist on YouTube. Picking up this book, it is top tier vibes. It is a vibey book. Guys, I do apologise if the quality is different, things have changed. I am having a real technological meh today, but I am not gonna let it discourage me from being back on YouTube. So I only have 2 books left to talk about. We are nearly there. So the next 2 are also up there in terms of like could be favourite books of all time, so a big deal. I read a lot of like books this year that could have been my favourite books of all time. I feel like the general atmosphere of last year was just, I either found them very middle of the road plain Jane, or they became like absolute obsessions for me. And so the first one, are we surprised at all, is Carrie, Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. We knew that Taylor Jenkins Reid's newest book was going to be one of my favourites. I really didn't have high hopes for this book, actually. I thought that it would really fall flat, but I should have had faith in my girl Taylor, because it was just the best thing ever. So if you have read any of Taylor Jenkins Reid's other books, most notably Malibu Rising, you would recognise the name Carrie Soto, as she is the one who is having an affair with Nina Reaver's husband. So not really off to a great start here, but what I loved is that this book wasn't really a redemption arc for Carrie in terms of the situation in Malibu Rising. This is very much Carrie Soto's own story, and is not just a continuation of the Reaver siblings' story. So Carrie Soto is one of the most decorated women's tennis players of all time. She really changed the game in terms of how tennis is played, but she is now retired from a knee injury. There is a new younger tennis player who is about to take over her record, and tennis is all Carrie has. So she naturally comes out of retirement for one season to try and get her record as the greatest tennis player of all time back, but it's very much about her relationship with her dad and finding that there is more to life than tennis at a point where she can't really play tennis anymore. She is so much older than the other people who she's competing against, and I loved everything about this book. This is like in my ranking of Taylor Jenkins Reid books. This is definitely probably my second favourite Taylor Jenkins Reid book. I love it so much. So yeah, it has a lot more heart than you would expect it to have, given it is a book about tennis, and it is very much a book about tennis. You will learn a lot about tennis, but it really works. And then the final book that I have to share with you is one that my friend actually recommended to me, and I'm so happy that I listened to her and I picked this up, because this is one of my favourite romance books of all time. If you have not read it, you need to go out and grab it right now. And that is The Kiss Quotient. I'm sure you have at least heard of one of the books in this series, which is either The Kiss Quotient, The Heart Principle, or The Bride Test. This is a reverse Pretty Woman story about our main character Stella, and she is a very, very successful economist, but she really struggles with dating because she has autism. So in order to get over her hang-ups about dating and having a sexual relationship, she hires a male escort to try and kind of teach her the ropes and become a lot more comfortable in these situations. And because of that, it really doesn't follow the same structure as a normal romance, and I really enjoyed that about it, because sometimes the structure of a romance can get a little bit boring when you're reading so many of them. So the fact that this one really shakes things up was incredible. And also reading the author's note of this, the author of this book wanted to write this book, and through the research that she did in order to have a character that has autism, she ended up realizing that she has autism herself, which adds an extra layer to this story that I wasn't anticipating it to have, and I just loved it so much. The characters are so cute, the sexual tension between them is so obvious and enjoyable to read, the dialogue is so funny, and I just really, really enjoy this book and couldn't recommend it enough. And so these are my favourite books of 2022. There's quite a good amount of favourite books here, to be honest with you. I think all in all, it was a really good reading year, and this year is shaping up to be just as good. If you guys have any recommendations for me that you think I would enjoy based on these, then do please leave them down in the comment section for me. Or if you have any questions about any of these books in terms of triggers, content warnings, tropes that are in them, any kind of questions about the books at all, do please feel free to ask them, because I would love to talk about these books some more. I do apologise for the technical difficulties. Hopefully that will be resolved soon. And yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you did and you would like to stay tuned for my worst books of 2022, then do please feel free to hit that big red subscribe button down below and stay tuned for future content. I upload every single Wednesday. I haven't recently, but I will be, so do make sure you are here and aware that that is happening. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week, you are enjoying everything you are reading, and there are no reading slumps in your future, and I will see you for my next video. Bye guys.